We've got Sky News contributor Kosha Gator is here with me. Kosha, let's start with the Australian left, and they're not coping well with the comprehensive defeat of their attempt to insert racial privilege into the Constitution. The meltdown has been widespread and frankly hilarious. Some of it has been hilarious. We've seen our cricketers needing counselling. We've had Guardian journos calling the whole country racist. And then we have the project and Waleed Aly's remarks, which many are seeing as sneering and condescending.
The biggest dividing line seems to have been education. So if you are in a seat that had high levels of tertiary education, a bachelor or postgrad, then you were at the very top end of the yes vote. And if you had the lowest levels of tertiary education, you were at the low end of the yes vote. And that's not to say people who are educated know what they're doing and people who don't have tertiary education don't. It's about the style of the message, I think.
Oh yes, all those silly people who don't have higher education, who are obviously, I don't know, too stupid to understand the complexities of inserting racial privilege into the Constitution. What do you make of the fallout?
I think it's been very instructive in more ways than one. For one, it's sort of showing where there actually is consensus on an issue in a country that's getting increasingly divided. It's kind of nice to see any issue where there's consensus, 60% of the population. It is instructive in those dividing lines of the electorate, such as what all these people alluded to in your setup. Educated versus non-educated, working class or middle classes versus elites. We see that around the world, whether it's US presidential elections, whether it's Brexit, that same kind of divide shows up. And I think it's because a lot of these things at their heart are these esoteric issues, and they're framed in moralistic terms. And it's almost a luxury for people, sort of the laptop class or the Tesla class, as they're known as, to subscribe to those things, whereas people that are struggling with cost of living and everything just don't have time for these kinds of things, and they don't like being called, racist or bigoted, and I think that's what you saw come out.
I think it's just, frankly, so simplistic to try to use the notion that, because they're more educated back this, it's because the proposal was complex and they understand the depth of the proposal. No, it has nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is the fact that, when you talked about that trend that we have seen in the UK, in the US, where the privilege, the most affluent seats are trending increasingly left, and this is very much a leftist pursuit. And the working classes, the aspirational classes, their values are very different from the racial politics and obsessions with identity politics. So this shouldn't surprise anybody who's been paying attention. And in contrast to some of the idiotic meltdowns and analysis that we have seen, let's have a look at this piece from Nick Cater, who wrote a really superb piece in The Australian with some great data points. And this data I found particularly fascinating. He wrote, the 5 seats with the largest proportion of Indigenous residents, they being Lingiari, Parkes, Leichhardt, Durack and Kennedy, they voted no by an average of 71%. The results in the 5 electorates with the smallest Indigenous populations, we're talking here about 0.2%, 0.3% seats like Goldstein, Chisholm, Bradfield, Kooyong and Higgins, well, they average 56% in favour. And that's what I was talking about there, the affluent upper classes, who also do tend to be more educated. So that's where that university graduate stat comes in. They back this, but they are so removed from this issue. They have no Indigenous community amongst them.
They don't. It's kind of, if you live in coastal cities or big cities and you're in sort of a professional class that doesn't require interfacing with those folks, you're getting your food delivered by Uber Eats, you're like consuming Netflix, you really are living in a little bit of an echo chamber or a bubble, and you just see that more and more around the Western sphere. It's really interesting. Another analogy here is a Hispanic vote in the US is increasingly getting stricter and tougher towards immigration and illegal immigration, and often people from these out-of-touch pockets assume that people will always vote in that favor, and you don't. You see immigrants kind of being often the strongest against immigration, and you see the Indigenous here voting a resounding no, which is very instructive.
And also with the Hispanic community, a very conservative, culturally conservative community. So some of the excesses of the trans movement, some of the left's pet issues really are at odds with their values.